Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today for today's presentation entitled High Velocity Service Delivery Through DevOps. The presentation will last for about 45 minutes. At the end of the session, there will be time for Q&A, but you're encouraged to add your questions all throughout the presentation in the Q&A window. Everyone will be on mute. Again, please use the Q&A window to ask questions. Please do not use the chat window. And again, questions will be answered at the end. Okay, we're extremely honored to have with us today David Blizzard, Senior Manager, Academic Technology, University of New Hampshire. David is a Senior IT Manager at University of New Hampshire within the Academic Technology Department. He is involved in implementation, management, and administration of a range of academic-related technologies, including computer labs and classrooms, web hosting services, media production and delivery, and application hosting. David has presented numerous times at other regional and national events pertaining to technology support in higher education. In addition, he teaches a course in network and system administration in the UNH's Information Technology program. So without further ado, I will turn it over to David.
Great. Thanks very much, Mitch, and welcome everybody. I'd say good afternoon because it's afternoon here, but I know it's not afternoon everywhere. Go ahead here, and a little bit of background about me. And while you're looking at this, and I tell you a little bit about myself, I think you should also see a poll that just popped up, which gives you some choices to let me know a little bit about who you are. So I know that we've got, it looks like almost 90 people online right now, so getting a sense of what the audience is. And you've got my general background here. Specifically to this talk, I have been involved in IT service management, ITIL efforts at UNH. We've adopted incident management and problem management first and other things related to that. Going back about 6-7 years ago now, we've added change management functionality and some other practices over the time since then. And then I've also been involved with adopting various DevOps type practices over the last 3 years within our organization, specifically about our the management of our web service infrastructure and the hosting systems there. So I've kind of lived a little bit in both worlds and know a little bit about each. And so kind of give you my sense of how they come together, how they work together, and what you can do to get the best out of both of them. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to submit that poll at this point. Todd, if you want to go ahead and close that down and share the results so we can see who we have here. So, okay, so we've got a lot of people on the IT service management side and people who are sort of in manager, director, CIO positions, and then a smattering of other stuff out there. So that's good. That's kind of what I expected the audience to be, and I suspect more you're coming from the ITSM, ITIL side of things than are coming from the DevOps side of things, because that's kind of the new thing out there. Quick review of what we're going to do today. So talk about what DevOps is, what it isn't, how that works, how it supports the overall goals of service management. Talk about some of the specific practices and tools, using some examples of things we've done, and talk about how these things do lead to what I would argue is the exact same goal that something like ITIL has, right? It's about delivering efficient, effective, reliable IT services to an organization. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're about. We're not here to do something because, hey, it checks off a box, or hey, it's the neat, cool thing. But I think both ITIL, ITSM services and DevOps practices both ultimately have that goal of what you can do to deliver value to the business. So what is it? What are we talking about? And some of this will be a review for some of you, probably new information for others of you. So what is ITSM? What is ITIL, right? And I should say right here that I'm going to base everything on ITIL version 3. I'm well aware that ITIL version 4 is out now, but it's still very new, and it does specifically try to integrate some of these concepts of things like from DevOps into it. But I think we're all sort of more familiar with ITIL version 3 stuff. So in ITIL 3, you've got those 5 core books, define these 5 big functional areas of things. This is very formally defined and structured, going back to its origins within the British government. And then, ITIL, what does it do? Well, it supports organizations and individuals to gain optimum value from IT and digital services. So again, there's this idea of value that you're trying to get and aligning the business strategy and customer needs with the delivery of service, okay? Very structured, very formalized, lots and lots of written down stuff. What is DevOps? Well, there's a big contrast here. There are no books. There are no official ones, at least. You can go out and buy several things that are DevOps, and if people are looking for good resources, I can certainly recommend some. The reason there are no official books is there is no guiding DevOps organization out there. There are some organizations doing trainings of sorts and offering different kinds of certifications, but it really is a movement that has evolved. The top result when you go search for what is DevOps is a Wikipedia page. I think that's rather appropriate based upon where it's come from and what it does and what it's about. But it does lead to some questions, right? If I do it and I put a DevOps label on it, is it really DevOps? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. And is that something that leads to confusion? I would say yes. Does it lead to flexibility? I would also say yes. You're kind of coming at things from two very different worlds. ITIL being very structured, DevOps being kind of some concepts, and you make of it what you will. In my view of what DevOps is and how it comes from, we'll start with Agile. Agile as a methodology for developing software, doing development, even doing some other kinds of project work, has this idea of these short cycles of let's create a specific request, specific idea. I would like to add this feature. We develop that one thing and we get it out and released, which is much better for designing software than the waterfall methodology, which unless you're designing things to, make that are really critical life safety kinds of infrastructure, which most of us are not involved with, really having that intense upfront heavy process that is waterfall really just doesn't lead to getting value to people quickly and efficiently. The problem with Agile is right here. We go out this door to release, and then it's magic, right? Oh, it just works, right? Yay, it's done, off it goes. Well, to those of us who come from the side of operations or system administration, which is really where I come at things from, it's not magic. There's a whole bunch of work left there when you say that, yeah, go release it now. And so you've got this difference between development, where developers are always doing new stuff, and they're working in their development environment where it may work just fine in their development environment because guess what? They're the one person using it and they're querying the database one time. That's an entirely different world than if you put something out there and it's got to be up 24/7 and you're putting it alongside lots of other applications that you're dealing with, not just this one project. And it does have to support 10,000 simultaneous connections. So there's big differences here between development and operations, and that leads to this issue of going back and forth where traditionally developers said, oh, we finished it, it's done, go run it now, and operations take something over and it's like, well, you haven't given us information and you haven't done load testing on this, and it doesn't fit right with these other frameworks we have to support, and you get this back and forth that doesn't work very well. We had a situation a couple years ago where a developer had been working on something for a long time and it was getting ready to have this whole system go out the door. And he emailed in that morning saying, yeah, I'm going to stop at the gym on the way in. So I'll be a little bit late in case anything comes up. It's like, no, that's not what we want, right? We want something where development and operations work together. And we are focused on the same end goals, the same shared understanding of what's going on, which means you need a lot of communication and a lot of collaboration back and forth between the two. You'll notice that nothing up here is about you must use tool X, right? Tools, there are plenty out there. I'll talk about a few, but DevOps is a lot more about a mindset that we are doing things collectively, collaboratively, working together to accomplish the ultimate goal of delivering services to end users, not this is my piece of it, that's all I do, that's your piece of it, that's all you do. So there are some kind of core principles of DevOps, and I think the best version of those are the three principles that Gene Kim defined in an essay well, it looks like about 6, 7 years ago now. The first one being systems thinking. Systems thinking basically means we look at the entire system. Like I said, we're not just focused on a piece of it, a set of functions, a operation, right? It's the entire thing start to finish. If people can't ultimately use it to get the information they need, buy the thing they want to buy, sign up for the course they want to take, whatever it is, if that whole end-to-end functionality does not work, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your part is good. Oh, the database is fine. Well, great and wonderful, but if we didn't design the entire thing and all work together to make sure it's good, that's no value to anybody. Second thing is amplifying feedback loops. So DevOps is very much about measuring, gathering information, and using that to go back and enhance and improve on. I love this infinite loop diagram down here at the bottom where it's, you build something, you release it, it goes out the door, and then you monitor it, and that goes back into your planning of what happens next, and it just keeps going and feeding on itself that way. Similarly, you may have things where you're doing automation or of certain things like testing and quality assurance to basically get quick feedback back to the developers instead of something gets tested 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months after you actually worked on it and developed it. Let's get those feedback loops happening fast and quick. And then the third one, a culture of continual experimentation and learning, which means by being on this webinar today, you are doing DevOps, right? It is about learning new things, trying out new things, being okay to experiment. And yes, sometimes you will do things and you will fail. And there may be some negative consequences there, but we also will learn from that and get better and improve. Again, lots of feedback and iterative type of work. Why is DevOps good? Well, there's a lot of examples out there. Some groups have been doing this State of DevOps report. This is a little bit old data at this point, but these kind of numbers come out of every one of these reports they've done over the last several years about how much more frequently you can deploy, which is nice, although I will say that's not the end goal in my perspective to say we must release, just like Etsy does 17 times a day, you push new code out the door. That's not the goal, right? But it is that we can deploy more quickly and we don't have to wait on things or have overly cumbersome processes. Stuff gets returned to people more quickly. And also when you push things out the door, you're doing it more correctly, with fewer problems, fewer failures of deployments, and you can recover more quickly. So there's a lot of value that's been demonstrated by organizations that have adopted these practices in the real world and how they compare to ones that have not. Quick sidebar on DevOps in higher ed, because this is something that I've kind of been focused on over the last couple of years. As we started looking at DevOps, I noticed some interesting things, right? DevOps has been around since 2009 when the term was first coined. And this is the trend of Google searching on DevOps over the last several years. And you can see that it's been growing pretty rapidly. Interest has pretty much doubled over the last 3 years in DevOps. So this is a big area of interest. If you look on EDUCAUSE's website, this is the same time frame and every instance of DevOps being mentioned. It's growing, but boy, that's not anywhere near the same curve. And when we started looking at DevOps stuff in 2015, 2016, I did what I did whenever we adopted something new in our areas, like, well, let's go see what other schools are doing. Let's go talk to other schools. How are they doing this? How are they doing that? I couldn't find anybody to talk to. We went to an event down in Boston that was about DevOps and some of the DevOps technologies. We were the only school there. And I was being told at that event stuff like, well, we use DevOps to integrate our 60 developers who are spread all over the globe. And, okay, well, that's not us. And, oh, yeah, we got to do this because we have to beat people to market and deploy stuff all the time and get things out the door. And I'm like, I'm not really trying to beat somebody to market, right? Higher education, yeah, it's competitive in certain ways, but it's not really like that. And it doesn't really matter because somebody's not going to buy a whole new college degree tomorrow than the one they're using today, right? It's just a different mindset and it's a different world. And also a lot of DevOps stuff is really heavily cloud-based. Do this in the cloud, run this on Azure, run this on AWS, use this tool that's in Azure, it'll do this for you. Well, some schools are like that, but not a lot. So there's a disconnect between a lot of these pitches of DevOps industry, DevOps companies, DevOps tool makers, DevOps advisors and trainers that didn't really fit. And so I kind of made it one of my things to work on is to try to promote DevOps more, but talk about it in ways that make sense to higher education. So hopefully this event here today will help do some of that. All right, so ITIL versus DevOps. Let's have a fight. So here is the ITIL version 3 framework. And you've got these areas, right? We start out with service strategy in the middle, service operation, service design, service transition wrapped around that, and then continual improvement of everything all around the whole thing. And so what we're going to do is talk about each of these areas a little bit and kind of how I see DevOps matching up or fitting in with them. Service strategy, that kind of core of ITIL of what you do and how you do it. Does DevOps have anything to say about that? No, not really at all. Now, using DevOps practices can be part of your service strategy, but DevOps isn't going to really enlighten how you do service strategy, right? Service strategy is a lot more about talking with the business, understanding their needs, understanding your capabilities, and those kinds of things. Nothing in DevOps is going to really enlighten that too much. Service design, a little bit. There are some areas of service design where DevOps comes in. Specifically when you're talking about some of the service design of like capacity planning and service levels and things like that. I have the note there in parentheses, see also SRE. SRE stands for site or service reliability engineering or site reliability engineering, which is some concepts out of Google. And that really much has a very sort of mathematical engineering structure around service availability and reliability that you're going to deliver and allowing you to use parts of that to try out new things, and it's okay if you fail. But anyway, there's a bit of stuff around service design. Service transition, yes, DevOps is very much applicable there, but I think a lot more flexibly than what we traditionally see from the ITIL world. Service operation, yes, DevOps is obviously about operations, it's part of the word, but I think it's less issue focused, less, hey, something broke, therefore I must do X. So there's some changes in sort of how DevOps looks at things. And then the continual service improvement piece really is kind of a core fundamental thing of DevOps, which hopefully you're picking up on already, that we're going to want to look at things, measure things, and use that feedback. Often in the DevOps world, this is called shifting left. If you think of a continuum that starts on one side where you have the developers and stuff moves from development to Q&A to production, the more we can shift stuff left, shift it towards the developers, get them information and feedback and get it to them earlier, the more they can continually develop and improve on and enhance things to make things better. Now, a lot of us are in a world where we may not necessarily be doing development. And I do think that if I asked schools, do you guys do development really? Some people would say, no, we really don't. Well, I think we probably do more development than we think we do. Even if you're writing scripts to provision users and courses to your LMS, that's an aspect of development. Or you're working on this little piece of glue that integrates one thing with another. But certainly DevOps requires that dev component. It requires development to be happening. But I think there are concepts here for DevOps that you can take even if you're in a situation where development is not happening. If you're going out and purchasing software as a service or even other commercial off-the-shelf applications that you're running locally, you can still think about those three ways of DevOps when you're talking about service delivery. I'll give you an example of that. We're using this Zoom platform for webinar today. We have Zoom here at UNH. There are certain features of Zoom, like the cloud recording functionality and its ability to integrate with the Kaltura media platform that we all have, that from the day we were looking at Zoom and wanting to get it as a campus-wide thing, we wanted to set that up and deliver it. In certain views of the world, we should have done a project to build that whole thing out and get that fully structured and fully set up before we let anybody use the tool. You can make an argument for that, but I would make a stronger argument to say, you know what, this piece can come later. These features we can turn on later. Let's get core functionality out the door. Let's people start using something. Let's ask them how it's going. Let's ask them what they'd like it to do more on. And if there are more advanced features that we want to hold off on right now, we can roll those out successively over time and not be holding things up just because there's something that's more complicated, requires more time to put together. Let's get people something that's of value. There's a term, term is slipping my mind, a minimum viable product. Right? A minimum viable product is the basic idea of what you can give somebody that gives them some basis of use. Let's give them something to start out with and then work from there. And I think that same concept can apply whether you're making something and developing it from the ground up, or you're buying something big and complicated. Let's start simple and do something useful with it, even if we don't implement all the functionality on day one. All right, I want to veer off and talk about some DevOps concepts specifically here a little bit. So, infrastructure. Infrastructure in the DevOps world can be a little different than what people might think of traditionally. So, infrastructure as code as a concept. What does this mean? Well, virtualization, when it came along, stopped us having to think about servers as being physical boxes. I didn't have to go buy a new piece of hardware to stand up a new server, right? I could go in to VMware or whatever I'm using and build up a new server and provision resources for storage and compute very flexibly. And that could be local or cloud hosted, but it gives me a way to build things that are not based upon a physical box. Now, you can start automating this with scripts. And there's a whole bunch of tools down below. You see there, Chef, Puppet, Salt, Ansible. These things can be used to automatically set up servers, configure the servers, and manage the servers based upon recipes or definitions that you put in place. This means you can start thinking about servers very differently than we have in the past because it wasn't a big physical thing that required customization in a lot of ways. And there's an analogy that I really love, and that's cats versus cattle. If you think about cats, okay, and if you're a Big Bang Theory fan, you might remember this episode where Sheldon goes a little more crazy than usual and goes off and buys a whole bunch of cats, and he names every cat after somebody who's on the Manhattan Project. So there's Feynman and Fermi and Oppenheimer. And this is what we do with cats, right? We get a cat, we love the cat, we name the cat, we take the cat to the vet if it's sick, we give the cat special toys and treats. It's a special, unique thing. On the other hand, if you think about cattle, right? Here's a bunch of cattle. They're pretty much the same. Yeah, if you look really closely, they have these ear tags with numbers on them so we can tell them apart, but they're pretty much the same. And honestly, we don't care too much when the cattle die because that's their point, right? We're raising them as a food product to get the meat. It's a whole different mentality when you look at it compared to how we think about cats. If you think about that from your servers, are your servers cats or are your servers cattle? If your servers are cats, they require very special care and feeding, and you love them and name them. And that means you have certain limitations and restrictions on them. If we can move to a world where we can define our servers by definition and function instead of them being this big specialized thing, then we can make them when we need them to be made. They can live for as long as we need them, and then we can get rid of them and throw them away. And there's container technology, which makes this even easier. Docker is the biggest name out there in the container space, but there are other ones as well. If you think about virtual machines, but basically go really lightweight with them, you have a shared underlying operating system, but then isolated, walled off, sandboxed applications with all the libraries they need to run. And so you make a container that does one thing. All this container does is run the Apache web server. That's it. And you can spin these up very quickly based upon definitions and thereby spin up environments very, very quickly. And that means you can spin up environments that are identical over and over again to do development, to do testing, to do staging, to do production. And you can build them on demand very quickly. And this also helps you take these big monolithic applications or big shared infrastructure where we had a server that ran 20 different things or even more and split it up. We've just completed a project where we've gone from running big servers that ran lots and lots and lots of websites on one server, but that meant if something went weird with one of those, it could impact all of those, to now all of our different web applications that we have, all our different websites, each run in an individualized set of containers. And we're running 1,000 containers almost, which is kind of crazy to think about, but they're built programmatically. And that changes the way we can think about things and changes the way we can act. And they're built from stuff like this. Here is an example of a file that will build you an entire WordPress stack. It will build you a database, it will build you Apache with PHP and the WordPress framework, all installed and all set to go. And it's this one file that you see over here on the right. Will basically, you take this and you run some Docker commands, and it will go and get a MySQL instance, download a standardized container for that. It will get an instance of this WordPress container that's pre-configured, and it will set them up and make them talk to each other, and you have a built working environment that quickly. And if you want another one, run it again. If you want 20 of them, run it 20 times. That's way different than thinking about building a custom server and you have to name it and manage it and care and feeding of it, because I can build one of these and then throw it away because I can build another one right after that. All right, so why did I go through all of that? Well, when you start thinking about, again, ITIL versus DevOps, we start thinking about some of these areas. Let's think about service transition and DevOps. Not all of these, I think, overlap with DevOps, right? Knowledge management really doesn't, but configuration, testing and validation, release and deployment, change management, there are DevOps ways of doing these things. Change is the biggest example, I think, to look at. In ITIL, a change is the addition, modification, or removal of any authorized, planned, or supported service or service component that could have an impact on IT services. Oh my gosh, we're going to change something. That's scary, right? We might have an impact on IT services. And this is a very broad definition, right? Any change is potentially damaging, it sounds like. So we have to manage change. We have to control change. We control that risk. Has it been tested? Can we roll it back? Does it conflict with other changes that are happening? We don't want to have somebody doing something with the network at the same time we're doing something with the database, at the same time we're doing something with the storage. And there's aspects of change management about making sure that impacted users are aware and informed of what's going on. These are all good, right? But at the same time, this can be a cumbersome process, right? The normal change process, according to ITIL, looks something like this, right? I fill out a form, I fill out some requests, it gets logged, there's review and evaluation, usually by a change advisory board or change control board, and then you get to the point of implementing this and finally reviewing and closing out the request. And this can be a long process, right? This can be days to weeks, depending upon how often you have these CAB meetings and so on and so forth going on. So when you think about all of that can slow things down. By comparison, the DevOps world, a DevOps change looks like a developer or a system administrator modifies code. That code goes into the repository where you store all your code, and you tag it to say, this is new code, I'd like to release it. That can then kick off automated processes to run security testing, performance testing, functional testing, accessibility testing, any kind of testing you can run in an automated fashion. If it passes, we can push that out to production system. We can take those containers that are running the current version of things, we can turn them off, turn on new ones very quickly. And let's say something bad happens, we can just say, oh wait, roll that back to the previous release. We do the same automation. Don't release tag 7.6, go back and release tag 7.5 and roll everything back. And this can happen in minutes. So there's a big disconnect here between the change advisory board world of ITIL and the DevOps change world. But they really can work together. And the key thing here in my mind is this DevOps way of doing things, CI/CD. All right, here is a graphical view of what I was just describing, where you can see a delivery team or development team, delivery team are building things. They check things into a version control system, and then that automatically triggers tests. If the tests fail, there's feedback back to the developer. They can make more changes, checks things in. If stuff passes, it can go out, come back, go out, come back. Only when you get something that goes through and passes all these tests does it move on and actually go out to release. Now, this is very schematic and diagrammatical and doesn't really tell you how all this happens, which is not simple. There's a lot of work to do to build this. But if you do build this out, it allows you to do different things. And there are terms in DevOps, CI, CD. CI stands for continuous integration. This is about developers merging their code and their changes into the main branch that they're working on. So if you're familiar with development processes, you may have multiple branches. You may have your core branch here. If I'm going to build off some new feature, I may branch my code and go over here and work on this new user interface function. Somebody else over here may be going and building out this new reporting function. And you can branch the code, it's kind of like a tree branches, but then those branches need to merge back into the master often, ideally daily, so that we keep everything together. And if I'm making changes over here and you're making changes over there, we stay in sync with things. So that's continuous integration. Continuous delivery says when those changes get merged back into the main line, we want to go through automated processes to move things into production. But this still includes some human interaction, usually around acceptance testing or things of that sort. Then there's another CD out there, continuous deployment, where all changes get moved to production. So we do this in an automated fashion. So you basically say, new piece of code goes out the door, new piece of code goes out the door all the time. This is what the Etsy's and Facebooks and Netflix and so on and so forth of the world do. Honestly, that's really hard. There's reasons to do it. It's hard to get there, though. We are currently in the continuous delivery mode of doing things. We've got automated processes to move stuff and do stuff and build containers and so on and so forth. We happen to use GitLab as our main project, but there's some other tools down there. Jenkins is very widely known. If you work in the Amazon Web Services world, they have tools. But basically, you can automate these things for you. And because it can be automated, and here's an example of what this may look like. Here's that same file to build out your WordPress environment. You'll notice the only changes between the left and the right, we upped our version number because this is now a new release. This is version 3.4 and not version 3.3 of the stack. And we're going to upgrade MySQL. So we want to upgrade to the most recent MySQL release or version 5.8 of MySQL. We make this one change in the file, and then we run a command that goes out and pulls down a new version of MySQL and spins things up in an automated way, replacing our existing containers. So when you think about this kind of a change, right, if I said to you, hey, we're updating our database infrastructure. We want to replace our database infrastructure and go from version 5.7 to version 5.8. Well, that sounds like a big capital C change in the ITIL world. In this file, it's one number, and I run a command. And I can run a command to undo it. So when you look at this small amount of actual configuration change that happens, when you go back to looking at how these work together, the changes you can do in a DevOps modality can really be thought of in a way that they fit under the ITIL standard, right? ITIL has the concept of standard changes. These are things that you do on a frequent, ongoing basis. They are well defined in the process of how they happen. And because of that, they are low risk. So all of these kind of DevOps-based changes where we're doing stuff where it's logged that it happens through the repository, it's automated through a pipeline, everything is tested, everything can be rolled back in the same standardized fashion, and you're doing these frequently, so the changes are smaller. We're not fixing 20 different things in a big whole package and rolling it out the door along with a new database and a new caching layer and a new everything. We're just saying, let's make this one feature tweak here. Let's add this one feature here. Yes, we're upgrading the database here. We're doing things more frequently. We're getting more value out the door. We do it more quickly. That can be done within the ITIL concept of these standard changes, and we are still delivering value, and we are still minimizing risk. So it doesn't have to be that everything has to go through the cab to do it the ITIL way. Look, so there's stuff about, again, service transition. If you apply this same kind of idea to like release and deployment management, the configuration management, I think you can see that the same kind of analogies can be made there. And then I want to move on to looking at the service operation side of things a little bit, looking at incident, problem, and event. I'd say DevOps doesn't really change problem management very much. Problem management is about getting to a root cause of why something failed. So that's just investigating your system, learning more about it. DevOps would say that that should be a collective response, right? It isn't my thing and your thing and we point fingers at each other. So maybe there are some things there. I don't know. I'm changing my own mind as I say this, but at least I think kind of the concept of what problem management about is still the same no matter where you look at it. But incidents and events are things that certainly DevOps has to address. I think when you look at an incident, right, this is normal service operation restored as quickly as possible, impact to the business minimized. Well, if we're automating testing, we hopefully avoid incidents, right? This didn't pass our test. It didn't have the same functional test, same result, right? If we're doing unit testing, regression testing in an automated way, we can avoid incidents in the first place. If we're making small changes, small little atomic, minor incremental changes to things, less likely that we're going to have some big problem that impacts lots of people. And we can roll back again very quickly to get back to that normal operational state and minimize the business impact. So I think you can see there's some definite connections here. And we think about event management, right? Looking at the actual system that's running and watching what's going on with it. Do we have traffic levels, storage space, database caching, measuring the system and responding when things get above certain thresholds. Within DevOps, that's kind of that core idea of the second way of feedback and feedback cycles. System events that happen can trigger automations that can happen, or they can become input to go into your next development cycle. So on an example of an automated response, if we have a website or web application that's running in containers, and we have 3 containers running right now, and the traffic levels reach 80% of our capacity, spin up another one. That's one command, Docker compose scale 4, boom, it will spin that up, and now you've got 4 of them running. Or maybe you spin up 5 or 6 of them running, right? You can scale it up very quickly, you can scale it down very quickly. There are tools out there that will actually monitor the traffic levels for you and automatically tune that for you, and as you need more, build out more for you. So these events that you might have had to have under an ITIL mode become some incident in a tracking system that somebody has to look at to say, hey, gee, we're seeing lots of traffic here, or our storage is running low, or the database cache is getting full. Now can be things you can handle in an automated fashion. Continual improvement in DevOps, absolutely, right? These are really one and the same. Hopefully by now you're seeing that this idea for DevOps is exactly what you should be doing, right? We want to do this idea of starting with a minimum viable product, something that's simple, get it out the door, get feedback, use that in feedback loops, shifting left, try new things out, and continually develop. Not have to be everything has to be so perfect from day one. And that's a challenge. And that's a big thing we've seen here. We just did a big project redoing all of our school and college websites. We're thinking in these DevOps ways of doing things. A lot of our business partners in the school and colleges are still thinking in the old world way of doing things because they've had that experience for the last 10 years, that their website would get built and maybe there'd be a few weeks of tweaking and fixing things. And then it would be like, okay, well, we're too busy now on some other project to come back and add something new to your website. So they were very, very concerned that everything must be perfect before it would go out the door. And we're trying to tell them, no, it doesn't have to be perfect, it has to be good, right? Good is good. And if we learn from good, we can make better and then eventually get to best. And it's taken some time and proving that we can do this over and over again, that we've continually enhanced this. Our school and college website build, I think, has now had about 20 to 25 releases over the last 6 months. So we're constantly enhancing and adding new functionality and enhancing this and fixing that. And, oh, you know what? You're right. For these people, their title isn't appearing properly in their staff listing. So let's fix that. That's one tiny minor little thing. So we fix that and get it out the door. Again, trying to do things very quickly and grow and improve on things over time. One last thought on continual improvement and measurement as it applies. Measure something useful. And this is a tweet from Joanna Young, who was a former CIO here. And I really like this because it's really easy to measure things, but measure things that matter, right? I told you we're running 1,000 Docker containers right now. Honestly, big freaking whoop. If I want to run some prize contest and I want to run 2,000 Docker containers or 10,000 Docker containers, I can run a command and I can run those instantly. That hasn't accomplished anything for the business. That hasn't made things better for our students or our faculty. So we want to measure things that are important, right? Does the website deliver what people need? Does this application help students get the information they need? Does it help them sign up for courses? Does it help them track their progress towards their degree? Is it available, right? That's important. If you've got an application that's not available, that's a problem. There's business goals associated with that. But don't just measure, oh, we're using 5 gigs of storage space. Well, if it's a contest, you want to get into rates of how much storage space you can use up. I can use up storage space really, really fast. That doesn't mean it accomplishes anything. So when you're thinking about what you measure, think about things that actually impact the business goal and get useful stuff out the door to people. All right. So there's my thoughts on things. That's what I wanted to share today. But I really would like to turn this into a conversation at this point. I am open to people telling me I'm wrong. I'm open to people giving me examples of how to do things differently or your own experiences. If you want to talk more about exactly how we've implemented certain things, I can get into the technical details. If anybody is currently not a member of the DevOps constituent group that EDUCAUSE runs, my email address is there. Feel free to fire me off an email and I will be happy to add you into the Slack channel that group uses. We're continually trying to grow that. That group is only about 1.5 years, 2 years old at this point. So we occasionally have little bursts of lively discussion and then it dies away for several weeks, but then it pops back up again. But we certainly would welcome anybody new who wants to learn more about DevOps or get some ideas or share things there. There is a link down there for feedback, which also will be probably shared out through some follow-up emails or things like that, but if you want to give feedback on today's session. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and let Mitch and Todd come back on and pull up the QA and see what we've got here for questions that are coming in that I can ask and answer. So see one here. We're usually very careful about proactive communication about changes, the impact. Okay, need to have this as captured in the CAB review. Same change, very small, would pass through security. No one in our service would know. How would a DevOps organization address this? Okay, good question. A key thing is certainly if you're doing something new for people, right, you want them to know about it. You had a problem, we fixed it. You asked for a new feature, we've added it. So there needs to be tracking of those things, right? We use GitLab as our repository. Within GitLab, we have issues that can come up. So we track all of our issues in there. So if somebody says, hey, we want this new feature added. We really would like to be able to highlight our faculty members' research interests. I'm trying to use a fairly real example we did. And so that when we have grad students looking at our department, they know what our faculty are researching in, so they could get that feature out the door. And they can understand what we're doing and learn about it. So that was, those kinds of requests get tracked. And then as we do development, we will actually close that issue out and then release those release notes with a new version that goes out the door so you know what the new things are. That certainly means it's tracked. I don't think that means it gets the message out to every end user, right? Some people are the kind of people who will go read the release notes. Other people are not. And so you do need to think about that. And you do want to make sure that you're communicating to people. I think that's something we need to do better on in our own group. It's something where I've wanted to have it be that we could, like our key people who work on our school and college websites, the communications staff in our different areas, that every time we rolled out a new door, I'd love them to get emailed and say, hey, we just rolled this new release out. here's the new functionality that's available to you now. And do it in a way that is user-facing in the communication, not us-facing, right? Added database field XYZ doesn't mean anything to people. Allow you to now post research interests. Okay, I can understand what that does. So it is something you have to address. If you're constantly just iterating on things over and over and over again and not letting people know what you're doing, that doesn't work. It's something we're still trying to figure out, but I do think that's a very good and important point. If you have things that are really, bigger impact, if we have stuff that we're doing that is a really major release of something, we would take the initiative to do outward communication as part of that going out the door. But for these small, minor changes, again, I'd vote towards the automated process, but doing it in a way that's customer friendly and customer facing.
Thanks, David. I got control back on my mic. Sorry about that.
No problem.
We have a couple questions that came in, so I'll go ahead and respond to these questions. So one came in asking about, do you have a tool that you use to automate testing?
That is our current area of focus. So within GitLab has CI/CD functionality. So it lets you build these pipelines to say, when I do X, trigger off these actions. So right now we are looking at a few core areas. We're looking at some basic unit testing kinds of things. Most of our development is done using the Drupal framework, and we're building up web applications. So we're using Behat as a testing tool. Behat is B-E-H-A-T, if you're not familiar with that. And honestly, a few months ago, I wasn't very familiar with it myself. So Behat lets you basically write things like, if I click add to cart, then shopping cart quantity should be, increased by 1 or something like that. If I click, search, I should get back this result. So you write these tests, and then it can automatically run those tests in the background for sort of functional testing. If you're doing security kind of testing, it's another one we're working on right now. We're using some web application scanning tools to look for vulnerabilities, like did we leave a form open that people could spam into? Do we have some sort of SQL injection vulnerability that we haven't dealt with? There are scanners out there that are open source. We're using one from the OWASP project, which is the Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP. And the tool there is called ZAP, Z-A-P, which is a Z attack proxy, I think. So you can basically take any tool that you can run from a command line basis and run it in some way. The challenge that we're discovering as we're trying to build this out ourselves is, what is pass? What is fail, right? You run a security scanner against something, it always reports back something of some level, even if it's just informational things. So we basically had to define what we really mean by pass and fail in terms of what we mean by, yes, this can go out to production or not. So there's some tricks there. We're looking at tools to do some basic accessibility baseline scanning. So basically, it depends on what you want to test for and how you're going to test. So there are many tools. The more important thing is having a framework that will let you do things. So whether that's Jenkins, GitLab CI/CD, or something else that will run these automated cycles, and if it passes, go to the next thing. If it passes, go to the next thing, to get stuff moved along in that way.
Hey, thank you. Another question. How have you involved your infrastructure team with DevOps? Do you organize them differently, or do you make virtual teams type assignments? What about like infrastructure group, like networking?
Okay. I will try to answer this. I'm not sure I'm getting the question completely. In our world, we have the ability to use a certain amount of our central infrastructure we have in place. We have a VMware environment. We've built and run virtual servers for a long time. Our virtual servers now are virtual servers that are running our repository, that are running our utilities, that are running our Docker hosts and things like that. So we can build those out as we need to. We do talk with that group a fair amount. But to some extent, as long as they're provisioning us the storage and compute resources underneath, what we're doing from there doesn't really matter too much. And a lot of the networking, like, okay, we've got this, this Docker container and 3 of them here running Apache, and they're all talking to a caching thing that's all talking to a database thing, and all that happens within a private network space internal to Docker. So we have talked with them. They've given us a private IP space that we can work within, that we won't conflict with anything else on the campus network for some of this stuff. But basically, what we do in that space is sort of separate and isolated from our broader networking infrastructure. So when we add new things or change things or whatnot, we're not requiring them to do something new in DNS or provision us new IP addresses or do all those levels things. So we haven't had to have them involved in the ongoing sort of day-to-day stuff. We just have had bigger conversations about, hey, you should know we're doing this kind of thing. And if there are concerns or questions, let's talk about them up front and then move on from there.
So I'll just suggest this, the person who asked that question, if that doesn't answer your question, feel free to join the DevOps community group, post that on Slack, and I'm sure you'll get a ton of responses. So hopefully that did answer your question. We have 2 more questions that came in. Let's try to get to them, and then I think we need to wrap up for the day. So another person's asking, so have you gotten any pushback from your service management team, and how do you get them on board with a less structured approach?
I'd say not from our service management team. When we went through implementing change management at UNH, we looked at sort of the typical framework that most places would do, sort of normal changes and standard changes and emergency changes. And we said, that's all well and good for us, but right from the get-go, those of us who kind of came from the system administration perspective said, you know what? We change things on a day-to-day basis, right? If you're running a server, you roll over log files. If there's a new operating system release that comes out, you roll it out the door. So there are different kinds of things that you do that are kind of ongoing. And so we had a lot of discussions as we were implementing change management about defining what our expectations were of what was going to be stuff that had to be a normal change, right? This is a big thing that everybody needs to know about, and it's broadly impactful. What things are going to define as standard changes. And then we actually went one level further, and we defined this stuff that we called system maintenance, where if you're running a server and doing certain tasks that are just kind of like, this is just ongoing care and feeding of this thing that I do every day, once a week, whatever, that we define that stuff as system maintenance tasks. Those things have to be logged and recorded in some way, but they don't have to be centrally reported, was the way we defined them. So there's no putting it into a central change tracking system that, okay, I rolled the logs today, or that I did, I changed the admin passwords today, because we change the admin passwords every 3 months or whatever the cycle might be. Or that I, did this standard process to pull down and install the most recent version of Apache on the server, because there's always the new versions that come out. So we've got a bunch of stuff where we sort of define things up front that we were going to say, look, as long as somebody has access to records that this happened, we're okay with those kinds of really small, isolated things happening on ongoing, regular bases. This was all sort of laid out before we got fully into this whole DevOps container world of doing things. But at least we've sort of had some of those discussions up front, and I think that's meant we really haven't had concerns there. It does help that my system admin, who does a lot of this stuff for us, is our rep from our area onto our cab. So he's very tied into what's going on in change, and he kind of keeps people apprised of when we're doing something new and different. And certainly we've had to talk to cab about, okay, we're making a major change to this infrastructure we use. We're moving sites from an old way of hosting to a new way of hosting. That's a capital C change, right? People need to know about this. But the fact that we've gone from Apache 4.6 to 4.7 to 4.8 to 4.9, as long as it's working, people really don't need to know that.
Thank you. Yeah, I personally, I like how you mapped each of the ITIL processes to DevOps and how can that be a solution and part of the process. So I know I'll be taking a look at that with my team. So we've kind of run out of time. It's close to the hour. I just want to thank David for sharing his insight and his wisdom with us. He has been kind enough to provide his information or his contact information. Just want to say stay tuned for information about upcoming webinars. We have plans in the work to present with other community groups, including business relationship management and project management. We also have a great lineup planned for the fall as well. We're always looking for fresh ideas. If you have an idea that you want to present on, we have a platform. If you have a voice, please send me an email or send the ITSM community group an email, and someone will get back to you. A reminder that the session was recorded and will be available within 5 business days on the ITSM community site website. It's a good place to view upcoming events and past recordings. Again, I want to thank David for his time and for the audience for joining us today. Everyone have a good day.
All right, you're welcome, and thanks for the opportunity, Mitch.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care.